mushy snuggle-buns. Now go punch some bad guys in the dick.
Problematic. It's one of those terms that you see thrown around a lot, and one that has an actual meaning that doesn't really have very much bearing, if any at all, on the way that people use it and what they mean when they use it. Problematic, when something being problematic, is supposed to mean that it constitutes or presents a problem. So a thing or a person or an action or a product or whatever else that constitutes a problem. The first use of the term problematic goes back to the 17th century, and its root is in the Latin problematicus, which is now my centurion name.
He has a wife, you know. You know what she's called? She's called Incontinentia. Incontinentia buttocks.
And problematic obviously comes from problem, and a problem is a matter or a situation or something that's unwelcome and harmful and that you need to deal with and to overcome. Your car breaks down, that's a problem, right? The idea of a problem is that it's something that's soluble, something that you can fix, something that you need to fix, even. But that's not how the term gets used, really, is it? Problematic as we use it now seems to come from earlier use of the term problem when it comes to things like problem behaviour, right, or a problem student in a school. That's the kind of problem we're talking about here, is that someone acting up or a certain behaviour that they engage in that's seen as a problem, something that needs to be solved or addressed or stopped, whatever else. In activism, to be problematic is supposed to mean that you hold or express or act upon a belief that's inherently negative towards a person or a group of people, right? So they think it means if you're problematic, you're being sexist, racist, homophobic, or whatever else. But it's the act that matters, not the intent or anything behind it. And that's where I think the problems start to come in. Every time I run into some of this new ideological language, this new speak, I wish Ambrose Bierce was still around and that a new edition of the Devil's Dictionary was being put together, or even the Unholy Hymnal, which was a book about political language around Vietnam. But mostly I think of the Devil's Dictionary because I think Bierce would have an absolute field day with a lot of the activist dogma from both sides of the aisle, the kind of language that people use. Now, as activists use it, as Bierce might define it, problematic might mean something more like problematic. Something that someone somewhere might possibly, maybe, perhaps have an issue with, and which I am going to point out on that imaginary person's behalf as a way to advertise my own progressive values in the vain hope that the ire of the mob will be directed to someone else rather than me. In social terms, labelling things problematic is the equivalent of joining the cult of Cthulhu on the understanding that it means he'll eat you last. Right? That's the kind of behaviour we're talking about. Many things get labelled problematic with the kind of stretch that would put Mr. Fantastic to shame. What? And that's because it's not really about the thing or what you mean by it or the context or anything else. It's just the action itself, and then people get head pats and good boy points for pointing it out. But there's these ideas inherent in the term problematic. This is a problem, this is something that needs to be solved, this is something that needs to change, and it's on behalf of this imaginary other that the primarily middle to upper class, you know, white, guilt-ridden teenagers really are the ones that are fighting for. They're the ones that are fighting for it. This imaginary change on the behalf of people that by and large don't give a fuck and have more serious things to worry about, you know, actual stuff that hurts them, policies, things like that, not language, or inclusively not putting the female symbol on period products, which was, yeah, that came across my feed this morning. It's not about actually making any kind of positive change anymore. Some people probably still use it in that way, but there's all this inherent in labeling something problematic, that it's something that needs to be solved, something that needs to be changed, something that needs to be addressed. You are wrong. There is something wrong with you and we need to change it, right? Rather than just accepting that maybe an arsehole is an arsehole and that's just the way of the world. There are arseholes and they're not going to change, and you need to find ways to adapt and cope with their presence rather than futilely trying to change them, or chasing down good people who aren't perhaps using quite the right words that are acceptable, yeah, for the chattering classes around the dinner table. But there's an inherent contradiction in this whole idea as well. It would be viewed as problematic to label someone, right, and to treat them as other, as different, as an outsider, because of that label you put on them. So you can't discriminate against them for being sexist, racist, homophobic, or whatever other label you want to put on people. Even political speech and political affiliation is protected to some degree, one place or another. But labeling someone problematic has all these effects. It creates social shunning. It casts people out, gets them knocked off social media, even though whatever it is that people are objecting to may be entirely conjured out of their own imaginations. Calling someone problematic is, in and of itself, inherently problematic. Zang.
Sure, you could play one of those hoity-toity horror games where the most horrifying thing that happens is someone wearing a corset who really shouldn't. Or you could grind a zombie's face into a belt sander.